After Robert Mueller announced his decision to indict Manafort, Gates, and Papadopoulos, Washington, D.C. was sent into complete and utter chaos. So we had the Donald Trump administration visibly shook from this announcement. We also had both sides of the aisle using the most hackiest arguments possible, which can basically be summarized as, you colluded with Russia. No, you colluded with Russia. Now, seeing that I'm someone who hates both Republicans and Democrats, not equally, but nonetheless, I despise both of them, I think I'm the best individual here to give you the full context and show you how both sides and pretty much everyone may be guilty for different reasons. So first of all, we'll start with Robert Mueller's announcement on Monday. So according to Pete Williams and Adam Edelman of NBC News, they report that former Donald Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and his longtime business associate Rick Gates were indicted by a federal grand jury on 12 charges, including conspiracy against the U.S., Special Counselor Robert Mueller's office announced Monday. Other charges against Manafort and Gates include money laundering, being an unregistered foreign agent, and 7 counts of failure to file reports of foreign bank and financial accounts. The indictment says that both men generated tens of millions of dollars as a result of their lobbying work for the Ukraine. They hid the payments from 2006 through 2016 by laundering the money through scores of U.S. and foreign corporations, partnerships, and banks, according to the charges. The indictment says that Manafort used his offshore accounts to directly wire payments for his personal expenses, which allowed him to avoid paying taxes on that income. They both entered not guilty pleas at their arraignment inside a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. on Monday afternoon. In addition, George Papadopoulos, who had been a foreign policy advisor to Trump during the campaign, pleaded guilty to making false statements to the FBI, according to Mueller's office. He entered the guilty plea in Chicago 3 weeks ago. The unsealed indictment stated that Papadopoulos misrepresented the timing, extent, and nature of his relationship and interactions with certain foreign nations whom he understood to have close connections with senior Russian government officials. Now, on the same day that these indictments were unsealed, we learned that someone on the left who was previously connected to Paul Manafort may also be in trouble given his decision to abruptly resign from his lobbying firm. So according to Anna Palmer of Politico, Democratic power lobbyist Tony Podesta, founder of the Podesta Group, is stepping down from the firm that bears his name after coming under investigation by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. The investigation into Podesta and his firm grew out of investigators' examination of Manafort's finances. Manafort organized a PR campaign on behalf of a nonprofit called the European Center for a Modern Ukraine. Podesta Group was one of several firms that were paid to do work on the PR campaign to promote Ukraine in the U.S. Podesta Group filed paperwork with the Justice Department in April, stating that it had done work for the European Center for a Modern Ukraine that also benefited the same Ukrainian political party that Manafort once advised. Podesta Group said at the time it believed its client was a European think tank untethered to a political party. And yes, that is the Tony Podesta, who just so happens to be the brother of John Podesta, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager in 2016. Now, these indictments rattled a lot of corrupt politicians in Washington, but much to the chagrin of Democrats, they don't necessarily provide evidence that Donald Trump did in fact collude with the Russians to sway the election against Hillary Clinton, nor do they demonstrate that Russia actually did tip the scales against Hillary Clinton. However, wealthy, powerful people who were overtly corrupt that used their influence to personally enrich themselves may now be in trouble for their criminal behavior. Now, this is part of the reason why I actually approved of Democrats' desire for an independent investigation into Trump and Russia, in spite of the fact that it might just turn into a big witch hunt. Not because I wanted a McCarthyist red-baiting witch hunt. That's not what I wanted, but because I knew that there was a possibility that this type of corruption could be exposed in an independent investigation. And now I'm proven right by that. Now, I'm loving all of this right now because Robert Mueller is doing what others have previously failed to do: hold powerful people accountable when they actually commit crimes. Because previously, in the United States, it's always been the case that we live in this two-tier justice system where the poor actually get prosecuted when they commit crimes, but the wealthy and powerful, they get away with everything. But Robert Mueller is actually holding these crooks accountable. Now, of course, since Paul Manafort, Gates, Papadopoulos, they're all connected to Donald Trump, well, this obviously doesn't bode well for his administration. And it really makes him look bad, which is why there are now reports that are coming out which indicate that Donald Trump is fuming as he watches all of this unfold on cable TV. Now, the Washington Post reports that, unsurprisingly, Trump's anger Monday was visible to those who interacted with him, and the mood in the corridors of the White House was one of wariness and fear of the unknown. As the president groused upstairs, many staffers, some of whom have hired lawyers to help them navigate Mueller's investigation, privately speculated about where the special counsel might turn next. The walls are closing in, said one senior Republican in close contact with top staffers who spoke on the condition of anonymity to speak candidly. Everyone is freaking out. And it's very clear that even Trump himself is freaking out. And you can gauge just how terrified he is by looking at the tweet storm he posted immediately after this was announced. So on Twitter, he states, "Never seen such Republican anger and unity as I have concerning the lack of investigation on Clinton-made fake dossier, now 12 million, the uranium to Russia deal, the 33,000 plus deleted emails, the Comey fix, and so much more. Instead, they look at phony Trump-Russia collusion, which doesn't exist. The Dems are using this terrible and bad for our country witch hunt for evil politics, but the Republicans are now fighting back like never before. There is so much guilt by Democrats and Clinton, and now the facts are pouring out. Do something." All of this Russia talk, right when the Republicans are making their big push for historic tax cuts and reform, is this coincidental? Not. Report out that Obama campaign paid $972,000 to Fusion GPS. The firm also got $12.4 million, really, from DNC. Nobody knows who okayed. Sorry, but this is years ago, before Paul Manafort was part of Trump campaign. But why aren't crooked Hillary and Dems the focus? Also, there is no collusion. So it's very evident that what Donald Trump is doing here is taking any and all past scandals involving Hillary Clinton and Russia, and he's throwing them all against the wall to see which ones will stick now. So clearly, this is a tactic to deflect any attention on his corruption away from him and onto Hillary Clinton. So I think this is a really sleazy tactic. We all know that Hillary Clinton is corrupt, but two things can be true simultaneously. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are both corrupt. Now, the reason why he seems to be shaking in his boots isn't necessarily because he's worried that Mueller will find out that he colluded with Russia in order to tip the scales against Hillary Clinton in some way, shape, or form, but what was first an investigation into only potential collusion between Trump and Russia has since expanded, and now that investigation includes Donald Trump's business dealings with Russian oligarchs. Some of these business dealings could pose a conflict of interest or even be illegal. And it's now the case that this investigation should actually scare him, because when it comes to Donald Trump's business deals with Russian oligarchs, this is a completely different story. We all know that he probably has some unsavory ties to Russian oligarchs. He may owe them money. We don't know what's going on there. But now it's truly the case that this investigation could bring down Donald Trump's administration based on that corruption aspect alone. And we now know, based on these indictments, that Robert Mueller doesn't mess around. He's not James Comey. He will indict powerful people. So that's why Donald Trump is incredibly terrified right now, and he's doing everything in his power to deflect and get us to look away from his potential corruption and look at what Hillary Clinton was doing. And Trump now knows that it's only a matter of time until Mueller uncovers overt corruption that could one day lead to him being impeached. And to him, that's obviously terrifying. Now, that's not to say that discovering collusion is completely out of the question. I think that we should keep an open mind, although what we've seen thus far in terms of evidence that Russia has swayed the election against Hillary Clinton, well, it's not very persuasive. I don't think Pokemon Go was effectively used to sow discord in the United States and tip the scales against Hillary. I don't believe that Russian trolls posing as Black Lives Matter activists and Dakota Access Pipeline protesters on social media is enough to tip the scales against Hillary Clinton. But when it comes to the question of collusion, we do know that Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort all met with a Russian lawyer in June of last year in order to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. Now, Democrats claim that this is actually tantamount to collusion with the Russian government, specifically because this lawyer was actually connected to the Kremlin. But the problem is that that connection is tenuous at best, and even if she was hypothetically directly connected to the Kremlin, the question then becomes whether or not this is collusion with the Russian government if Trump Jr. didn't know about her affiliation with the Kremlin. Now, on the other hand, Republicans have flipped the story around, and they're now alleging that this meeting was set up by Democrats in order to entrap the Trump campaign, but there's also not much evidence to validate this theory either. So both sides are being incredibly disingenuous about the facts that have come to light. But with that being said, getting back to Donald Trump trying to evade criticism by shining the spotlight on Hillary Clinton, even if what he's doing is an obvious diversion tactic, well, is he exaggerating? Yes, he is exaggerating with some of the details. Is he entirely technically wrong, however? Not entirely, actually. So as you all know, conservative media outlet The Washington Free Beacon was paying a company called Fusion GPS to do opposition research on Donald Trump when he was running in the Republican primaries in 2016. Now, once they stopped funding this research in April, once it became clear that Trump was going to be the Republican Party's nominee, Hillary Clinton's campaign, along with the DNC, well, they then decided that they would now foot the bill since the Washington Free Beacon was no longer going to do that. So at this point in April, Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC were now paying Fusion GPS for this research. Now, there's nothing wrong with opposition research. In fact, I think that opposition research, generally speaking, is really important because we need to be as informed as possible about these candidates before we make our decision. However, to suggest that this was just opposition research is a gross oversimplification because, first of all, according to Adav Nodi of The Hill, the Clinton campaign and the DNC did not comply with their legal obligation to disclose their payments to Fusion for opposition research. Instead, they concealed the fact that any payments were made to Fusion at all. Rather than disclosing the spending, the campaign and the DNC told the FEC the money had gone to their law firm, and the Clinton campaign said that it had made the payments for, quote, legal services. In other words, the DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign broke the law by lying about how they were spending their money, and they did not disclose this to the FEC. If you're going to fund opposition research, then you need to disclose that information. We need full transparency. We need to know how you're spending that money. But this isn't the only problem, because it actually does get worse for Hillary Clinton. So as Paul Roderick Gregory of Forbes explains, the most undercovered story of Russiagate is the interconnection between the Clinton campaign, an unregistered foreign agent of Russia headquartered in DC, Fusion GPS, and the Christopher Steele Orbis dossier. The Fusion story has been known since Senator Chuck Grassley sent a heavily footnoted letter to the Justice Department on March 31st of 2017, demanding for his Judiciary Committee all relevant documents on Fusion GPS, the company that managed the Steele dossier against then-candidate Donald Trump. Grassley writes to justify his demand for documents that the issue is of particular concern to the committee, given that when Fusion GPS reportedly was acting as an unregistered agent of Russian interests, it appears to have been simultaneously overseeing the creation of the unsubstantiated dossier of allegations of a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Now, understand that this dossier alleges that Donald Trump was giving the Russians favorable treatment because they were blackmailing him with a tape that they had of him getting peed on by Russian hookers while he stayed in a Russian hotel. Now, there is zero evidence that this tape even exists. However, other elements of this dossier were proven true. So this is really, I mean, you have to look at this dossier in a nuanced manner. Parts of it turned out to be true, parts of it false. Zero evidence, at least at this point. But what we do know is that the company Fusion GPS was an unregistered foreign agent, and this entire Trump-Russia kerfuffle was initially catalyzed by the idea that Donald Trump committed treason by working with a foreign government to sway the election, and now it seems as though the accusers, i.e. Hillary Clinton and the DNC, may be guilty of doing the same exact thing that they accused Donald Trump of doing. But another way that Donald Trump is trying to deflect criticism away from himself and onto Hillary Clinton is by bringing up the Uranium One deal. Now, is he entirely wrong here? Not exactly. Again, he's exaggerating and he doesn't have all of the details right. But this is still a pretty fishy situation. So John Solomon and Allison Span of The Hill reports, before the Obama administration approved the controversial deal in 2010, giving Moscow control of a large swath of American uranium, the FBI had gathered substantial evidence that Russian nuclear industry officials were engaged in bribery, kickbacks, extortion, and money laundering designed to grow Vladimir Putin's atomic energy business inside the United States, according to government documents and interviews. Federal agents used a confidential U.S. witness working inside the Russian nuclear industry to gather extensive financial records, make secret recordings, and intercept emails as early as 2009 that showed Moscow had compromised an American uranium trucking firm with bribes and kickbacks in violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FBI and court documents show. They also obtained an eyewitness account backed by documents indicating Russian nuclear officials had routed millions of dollars to the U.S. designed to benefit former President Bill Clinton's charitable foundation during the time Secretary of State Hillary Clinton served on a government body that provided a favorable decision to Moscow, sources told The Hill. Bill Clinton collected hundreds of thousands of dollars in Russian speaking fees, and his charitable foundation collected millions in donations from parties interested in the deal while Hillary Clinton presided on the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Now, the reason why this looks bad for Hillary Clinton is because while she was on the Committee on Foreign Investment, she was one of 9 people to approve this deal. Well, it's the case that Russians turned out, according to the FBI, if we can believe them, but we do have to be skeptical, the Russians were trying to bribe public officials to get this deal through, and it just so happened that they gave Bill Clinton speaking fees, and individuals who invested in Uranium One, who would profit from this deal going through, donated money to the Clinton Foundation. Now, it's also the case that liberals are just dismissing this altogether, and I understand why they may initially feel inclined to do this, and that's because Donald Trump has misrepresented this case. But while liberals like Joy-Ann Reid are desperately trying to downplay this, the facts are still troubling even when you go beyond the headlines. So liberals claim that this is just a nothing burger because there's currently no evidence of a quid pro quo. But that's not a very persuasive argument because corrupt public officials usually make sure to cover their tracks. Now, liberals also claim that since most of the donations to the Clinton Foundation from investors in Uranium One had already sold their stock in the company by the time this deal came before the Committee on Foreign Investment, well then, it obviously isn't a bribe. But that's really disingenuous because there were still millions that were donated to the Clinton Foundation from investors of Uranium One. So it may not be 145 million from people who hadn't sold their stock yet, but from people who were investing in Uranium One, it was about 4 million. That's still problematic. Yes, the story was initially exaggerated, but that's still incredibly problematic and troubling. In fact, even in trying to downplay the significance of what looks to be overt corruption, PolitiFact claimed that donations from Uranium One investors that hadn't sold their stocks in the company before Hillary became Secretary of State and oversaw this deal was just 4 million. But still, that's a huge number to give to a public official who's going to oversee a deal that would heavily favor your company. Now, liberals are also saying that right-wingers are blowing this out of proportion because Hillary Clinton was just one of 9 individuals to approve this deal. But that doesn't eliminate the possibility that investors in Uranium One had given that $4 million to Hillary Clinton to influence her decision. Even if they just sway one individual, well, that's still problematic. Even if they still would approve of this Uranium One deal today with no bribes, well, still the fact that Hillary Clinton's foundation accepted these bribes, the fact that Bill Clinton accepted speaking fees from Russia, that's still incredibly problematic. You can't deny that. And even PolitiFact says that this looks, quote, fishy. And Hillary Clinton herself even called these allegations baloney, saying, I think the real story is how nervous they are about these continuing investigations. So, do you see what's happening here? Donald Trump, people within his administration get indicted, and then he points to Hillary Clinton and says, no, you're colluding with Russia. And then Hillary Clinton, she points the finger back at Donald Trump and says, well, no, you're colluding with Russia. And meanwhile, followers of Hillary Clinton and followers of Donald Trump, they go along with this, and they're unable to see the glaring hypocrisy on both sides. Is the Uranium One case, is that the best example that demonstrates just how corrupt Hillary Clinton is? No, it's not. But the reason why Donald Trump brought it up, reasonably so, is to demonstrate how she was also tied to Russia. Do we currently have evidence that Donald Trump himself knowingly colluded with Russia in order to sway the election? No, we don't, but it's probably the case that he does have corrupt business dealings in Russia. That may not have had any impact on the election, but it's still problematic, it's still corruption. But bringing it back to the allegations that both sides continues to lob against each other, loyalists of both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are unable to see past their own hypocrisy, and it's so frustrating to me. And both sides, they look at politics as though it's a team sport, and whatever their team captain says, they're willing to go along with it. No questions asked, no objectivity whatsoever. Whatever Donald Trump says, his followers will go along with that. Whatever Hillary Clinton says, her followers will go along with that. And it's, again, it's really frustrating, but here's the reality. Both sides are corrupt and probably guilty and probably associated with Russia in some way, shape, or form, albeit for different reasons. Trump's corrupt business deals in Russia might just come back and bite him in the ass, whereas Hillary Clinton's corruption in the form of bribes taken from the Clinton Foundation, while there may be no evidence of a quid pro quo here, well, we'd be dense to not see what's really going on. This is bribery. This is corruption. They're all liars, and both sides are just as willing to point the finger at the other to deflect from criticism that they're receiving. So as Mueller's investigation expands, because he did expand it to Tony Podesta's lobbying firm, as it expands, I hope that people on both sides have to eat their words, because this investigation now, it's really far-reaching. It's not just about Trump colluding with Russia to influence the election. This is now about corruption. This is now about Donald Trump being affiliated with corrupt Russian oligarchs. There is evidence that Hillary Clinton took bribes from Russian companies while she was voting on their behalf. Is she just one of 9 people on that committee that approved the Uranium One deal? Yes, but nonetheless, that's still problematic. But both sides are unable to see what their team captain is doing wrong here, when most likely there's a ton of corrupt public officials on the left and the right that will be exposed as a result of Mueller's investigation. And the people who think that their team is right and the other team is wrong no matter what, they need to understand that they look very foolish right now. And attempts used by both sides to distract are incredibly disingenuous, because even though Donald Trump, clearly he wants to, again, divert that spotlight away from him and onto Hillary Clinton, well, that still doesn't change the fact that you're probably going to be exposed as a corrupt businessman, because there's a lot of evidence for that. But in shining the spotlight on Hillary Clinton, yeah, she's going to be exposed as a corrupt Secretary of State. So there's a lot of evidence of corruption on both sides. And now I think that this investigation is more important than ever, because I think that corruption that is done by public officials in powerful positions needs to be addressed, and they need to be punished. So I hope that all of these corrupt public officials get what's coming to them if they actually did take bribes or collude with foreign agents in any way, shape, or form. So look, here's what we all need to keep in mind. We have to be objective and try to see past our own biases that make it difficult to see what the other side is talking about here, because now I've seen evidence on both sides that they're all corrupt, but we also can't deny the fact that Donald Trump is the president. Hillary Clinton has no political power. She still influences the Democratic Party, but Donald Trump is currently the president. So someone who is currently overseeing policy, I think that their corruption is important. Hillary Clinton's corruption still needs to be addressed, but Donald Trump is currently in power. He's now legislating. He's influencing policy in a really substantial way. So I want to get to his corruption first. I don't care so much about what Hillary Clinton did in the past. We now see that there's a lot of corruption that went on that influenced her decisions, not just when she was Secretary of State, but while she was a senator. But that's in the past. And yes, let's address it, but Donald Trump is the president right now, so we need to make sure that we stop his corruption, because if we don't, then that could affect future policy decisions that he makes. So look, at the end of the day, this is a really complex and convoluted story. The details are very nuanced and difficult to understand, but realize that both sides are incredibly disingenuous, and we need to be extra careful and just accepting any and everything that one side says over the other. And also, I think it's funny that Fox News is not talking about this at all. They're covering emojis. So it's just mind-boggling to me, really, that we have so much, so much manipulation going on and deflection going on. Look, I hate to break it to you, but Washington, D.C. is a swamp. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are corrupt. Trump's deflections doesn't change the fact that he's corrupt. Hillary's deflections doesn't change the fact that she's corrupt. But this investigation is particularly important as it pertains to Trump because he's the president. I want to make sure that Donald Trump is not doing the bidding of any government, of any business that he had ties with while he was a businessman. And that's all I'll say about this.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.